And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Liberty Watch. I'm your host, Liberty Man Van, where we talk about libertarian principles, and that includes we believe in free speech, freedom of association, free markets, and the non-aggression principle, which means you can't hit people and you can't take their stuff. So basically we're fighting for maximum freedom for everyone. So what are we going to talk about on the show today? We've got a pretty good show lined up for you. And the first story is going to be about liberal media bias again. And that story is about Roseanne Barr. And we'll get into the details of that in a minute. And our second story will be about the teacher strike, the recent teacher strike here in 2018. Today is June 10th, 2018, as a matter of fact. Earlier this year, there were several strikes across the country. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then our final story is about Donald Trump making a recent statement that he might end the federal ban on marijuana. Kind of. You'll see what I mean when we get to that story. So let's get to it. And our first story I named Liberal Media Bias again. And the subtitle is Samantha Bee Flies, but Roseanne Dies. And those of you who know about Roseanne Barr, she had a show on television that was very popular back in the 90s, very good ratings. And the show shut down, and they recently here just restarted the program this year on ABC, and it was doing really well. Ratings were doing well. But unfortunately, she took to Twitter one day, and in a tweet, she was talking about former Obama advisor Valerie Jarrett. And she described her as the product of what would happen if, quote, the Muslim Brotherhood and the Planet of the Apes had a baby, end quote. Well, as you can imagine, that tweet didn't go over very well. It was deemed to be a very racist remark. She immediately took to Twitter and apologized, and she said, here's her apology, and I will read you the full quote. She said, quote, I apologize to Valerie Jarrett and to all Americans. I am truly sorry for making a bad joke about her politics and her looks. I should have known better. Forgive me, my joke was in bad taste, end quote. Now, that didn't matter. Pretty soon, she was tarred and feathered and fired, and the show was canceled. Okay? So not only her, but the other co-stars on the show and people in the production crew and everybody all of a sudden were out of a job. So bad for everybody involved there. Now, I'm not saying that Roseanne's comments were anything that I could palate or that anybody would palate. They were rather sticky, indeed. And we'll talk about whether she should have gotten fired or here a little bit later. But right now, what I want to show you is kind of the double standard in the media and also corporate America. And we know about in universities how it's slanted all to the left of the political spectrum toward the Democrats. And As you know, I've stated before on this show, I don't have a dog in that hunt. I don't care about the Democrats or the Republicans. They're both big spenders, and they're spending us into oblivion. And they're not following the Constitution. I don't care for either one of them. Samantha Bee, this is a lady I'd never heard of, but apparently she has a show on TBS, and and she's a lefty as well. Lefty. And by the way, Roseanne's real crime was that she was a Trump supporter, I do believe. But let's see what happens, how they treated this Samantha Bee lady a little differently. She made a vile remark about Ivanka Trump, President Trump's daughter, in which she used the C word. Yes, that's a four-letter word, figuratively and literally.
After decades of ignoring the issue, Americans are finally paying attention. Well, most of us. Ivanka Trump, who works at the White House, chose to post the second most oblivious tweet we've seen this week. You know, Ivanka, that's a beautiful photo of you and your child, but let me just say, one mother to another, do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
And then afterwards, she made an apology. And I'll read you her apology. It sounds sincere. She said, quote, I would like to sincerely apologize to Ivanka Trump and to my viewers for using an expletive on my show to describe her last night. It was inappropriate and inexcusable. I crossed a line and I deeply regret it. End quote. Now, her remark came just a day after Roseanne Barr's show had been canceled. Now, the very next night, I believe it was, she's on the TV Academy Awards show. Okay, so she's in front of the camera. And so she made these comments while she was on camera during that show. Our piece attracted controversy of the worst kind, Bee said, of the segment about the Trump administration's immigration and border policies that ended with her calling Ivanka Trump a feckless C word who needed to do something about her dad's immigration practices. She continues, we spent the day wrestling with the repercussions of one bad word, when we all should have spent the day incensed that as a nation, we are wrenching children from their parents and treating people legally seeking asylum as criminals. Be added, if we are okay with that, then really, who are we? End quote. So, I'm apologizing, but not really. And, of course, there were some other liberal commentators, a couple of celebrities that came to her rescue. Former Comedy Central host Jon Stewart comes to her defense and he says, quote, I'm going to tell you something about Sam Bee because I've known her for a very long time. You could not find a kinder, smarter, more lovely individual than Samantha Bee. Trust me, if she called someone a C word, and he left it at that. In other words, if she calls someone a C word, let's go ahead and fill in the blanks. She probably deserved to be called the C word, right? Okay, and not just Jon Stewart, another actress during this TV Academy Awards show gets up and she's nominated for an award. Her name is Minnie Driver, and I wasn't familiar with her either. Sorry, I'm just not big into popular culture. But she said Thursday that Ivanka Trump does not possess the intelligence or personality to be described as a C word, the profane term used by comedian Samantha Bee. That was the wrong word for Samantha Bee to have used, Driver wrote on Twitter, but mostly because Ivanka has neither the warmth nor the depth to be a C word. Wow. So you can see how the media treats people differently depending on their political persuasion. And this is just another example of widespread liberal media bias. So what is the libertarian perspective on this episode? Well, should ABC have fired Roseanne Barr? Should TBS have retained Samantha Bee? Well, our feeling on this is that ABC is a corporation, they're a company, and the people who own that corporation should have the right to determine whether they fire her or not. That should be for them to determine. And same thing goes for Samantha Bee. If TBS wants to keep her after those vile comments, they're perfectly entitled to do so because they own that company. And your response should be, for example, if you think Samantha Bee should have been fired, then hey, vote with your feet. You can do that with capitalism. Vote with your feet, which means don't watch the show anymore.
Teachers in Oklahoma are planning to walk off their jobs tomorrow, even though lawmakers just gave them an average $6,100 raise. Oklahoma educators argue it's just not enough, and they're planning to strike tomorrow. Oklahoma ranks 49th in the nation in teacher salaries, according to the National Education Association. The average salary for a high school teacher is $42,460 a year. That's almost $18,000 less than the national average. Many teachers in Oklahoma say they have to take on one or more part-time jobs just to get by.
What goes into 3 and 9?
For the better part of 2 months now, teachers' strikes and walkouts have been spreading from West Virginia to Arizona. Today in Kentucky, thousands of teachers rallied at the state capitol in Frankfort over school spending and to protest a new pension law. It comes just as another walkout is ending in Oklahoma. William Brangham takes a deeper look at what's behind these strikes.
Oklahoma's educators and staff will return to school after the state's largest teachers union called for an end to their 9-day walkout. Teachers and support staff will get raises, but that legislation was already signed before the walkouts began, and there will not be any additional school funding. Instead, the union urged members to support pro-school spending candidates in the fall elections. A wave
Today, teachers in Colorado and Arizona joined the wave of educators protesting around the country. The simultaneous walkouts follow similar ones in West Virginia and Oklahoma. And they stem from similar gripes: insufficient funding for public schools and low pay for public school teachers.
Our next story is entitled Teacher Strike. And this year there have been several teacher strikes in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, I believe Colorado. So why do we care about teacher strikes? As far as education is concerned, I believe that the problem here is with teachers striking. They're free to strike, surely. But the reason this type of thing happens, and they can't seem to figure out how much to pay them, is because of this is what Ludwig von Mises described as the calculation problem. Because the schools are or a monopoly. All right, they've got a monopoly on your tax dollars. So, yes, I realize there are private schools and you can also homeschool, but if you do that, you're going to have to pay twice because you've already paid. And, you know, most people just can't afford to pay twice. So, in effect, the public schools are a monopoly. And what's the problem with monopolies? Well, there's no competition, right? And when there's no competition, that means the teachers are kind of stuck at that school, aren't they? There are fewer options available. And what would happen in a free market if, you know, if the schools weren't a monopoly, a government-enforced monopoly, is that teachers' salaries would find, you know, the market would determine what those salaries are, just like in any other job. But it does make it harder for teachers to move because, you know, the next school might be in the next county over and they'd have to move. They might like where they live in that city. So I would like to see actually more options for teachers in terms of employment places. And what that means is, my feeling is education, if you're going to support it with public dollars, and we can even have a debate on whether we should do that, but if you're going to support it with public dollars, give the parents the money, whatever you're going to spend on them. You're going to spend $6,000 per student, put that $6,000 in the parents' hands and let them decide where they want to send their kids to school. Give the power to the parents. Right now, the parents don't have any power. Yeah, they can go complain to the school board, the principal, or whatever, but you know what? When you're running a monopoly, you don't have to do what parents want you to do. Plus, parents may have different ideas about what to do. And they're not going to all agree. So if you're not happy with that school for some reason, you can go complain to the school board, but you're still not probably going to get everything you want. But if we had choice, if parents had more choice, if we didn't steal the money from them in the form of property taxes and sales taxes, steal it from their pocket and give it to a monopoly, leaving the monopoly in control rather than them, then parents would have more options. So that's the liberty view, is to give the parents the opportunity to decide where they're going to send their kids to school. Okay. Now, what were they striking for? Well, some of the teachers were striking because they said the schools, you know, they're not spending enough on education anymore, and particularly in Oklahoma. And they were asking for more pay and also for better supplies for the kids, you know, newer books and so forth. Now, some people will say that, you know, education, my idea about leaving that to the market, the free market, people will say something stupid like, well, education is too important to leave to the market. You know, or health care is too important to leave to the market, etc., etc. Please, is food too important to leave to the market? Is education more important than food? No. You got to be alive, which requires food, before you can get an education. Do I say to you, oh, food is too important to leave to the market? So don't give me that argument. Now, Here's an article by fee.org entitled How Media Outlets Misinform the Public About Teacher Pay. And from the article it says, during recent teacher walkouts in Oklahoma that captured national attention, many major media outlets reported misleadingly small figures for teacher pay. By failing to reveal all aspects of teacher compensation, these outlets hid the true cost to taxpayers, which now amount to an annualized average of about $120,000 for every public school teacher in the United States. That's a lot more than they're saying in these reports. All right. Continuing with the article. CNN, for example, published an article by Bill Wire claiming that in most districts of Oklahoma, a teacher with a doctorate degree and 30 years experience will never make more than $50,000 a year. That claim, which CNN neglected to document, is at odds with comprehensive data from the U.S. Department of Education and U.S. Department of Labor. This information for Oklahoma and the entire nation follows. So how much do they really make when you include their compensation? Health benefits, pensions, and so forth. Continuing. For the 2016-17 school year, the Department of Education reports that the average salary of full-time public teachers was $58,950 in the U.S. and $45,245 in Oklahoma. Those figures generally exclude benefits such as health insurance, paid leave, and pensions. Oh, those are pretty big now, particularly with healthcare costs being as much as they are. All right. Next section, the article says, according to the Department of Labor, benefits comprise an average of 33% of compensation for public school teachers, etc. That, however, still doesn't tell the complete story because full-time private industry employees work an average of 37% more hours per year than full-time public school teachers. Almost 40% more, your regular employee versus a teacher. 40% more. This includes the time that teachers spend for lesson preparation, test construction and grading, providing extra help to students, coaching, and other activities. Accounting for the disparity between the annual work hours of full-time public school teachers and full-time private industry workers, the average annualized cost of employing teachers in 2016-17 school year was $120,578 per teacher in the United States and about $92,545 in Oklahoma. There is yet more to this picture because the cost of living varied between states. Okay, adjusted for this, the average annualized immediate compensation of Oklahoma teachers in 2016 and 17 was about $102,943, or roughly twice what CNN says a teacher with a doctorate degree and 30 years experience will never make in most districts of Oklahoma. And hey, I'm pro-teacher. Teachers should make what they're worth. The problem is when you have a monopoly, it's difficult to determine how much anyone should be paid. Our next story is entitled Partial End to Federal Marijuana Ban? ? And this has to do with comments in the last few days that Trump made when somebody asked him a question regarding a bill by Senator Gardner from Colorado. And that bill would just end the federal ban on marijuana in the states that have already legalized marijuana, so it wouldn't apply to all the states. And President Trump said, oh, excuse me. I almost forgot. We're talking about President Trump, aren't we? President Trump said, I support Senator Gardner, the president said before departing for the G7 summit in Canada, is quoted by the Los Angeles Times. He said, I know exactly what he's doing. We're looking at it, but I probably will end up supporting that, yes. So he hasn't said for sure whether he's supported or not. He could still back down on this. But as you know, we talked about this issue before, and my position as a libertarian on it is, first of all, it violates personal sovereignty. If you own your own body, then no one else should be able to tell you what you do with your body unless you're hurting somebody else with it. Okay? You should be perfectly able to hurt yourself if that's what you want to do. You know, I would discourage people from using drugs. They're not good for your health. They're not good for your mind. But that doesn't mean we should have a law against it, because if you do that to yourself, you're doing it only to yourself and you're not hurting anybody else. So it should not be illegal. And that's our perspective on it. Now, another argument in favor of or against any federal ban is that it's simply unconstitutional. So there's nothing in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that says anything about prohibiting or regulating what people put into their body. And so for all those reasons, we're opposed to this federal ban, and I wish they would go farther and just lift the federal ban. And this also violates state sovereignty. This should be under, you know, the 10th Amendment. All those things that under Article 1, Section 8, the federal government can't do should be reserved to the states. So this should be reserved to the states. So you can make a state sovereignty argument against the bans as well. And my next article is entitled, GOP, Not a Small Government Party. That's not a small government party. Now, I've told you before on this show that I used to be a Republican, and the reason I was a Republican is because I thought they were going to be fiscally responsible, because they always talk a good game, but when it comes down to it, they say one thing and they do another, and your actions speak a whole lot louder than your words. But this is from a Reason.com article entitled, Stop Calling the GOP the Party of Small Government. And it starts here, it says, there was a time when GOP lawmakers called for the elimination of entire federal agencies, you know, like the Department of Education, that was only started during the Carter administration in the 1970s. Hasn't been around that long. Today, milquetoast promises to pursue smaller government are followed by votes for even bigger government. And I'll just give you the example of what he just said there. The Republicans recently passed this big tax cut. At least they cut some income taxes, but then they eliminated some deductions, so it didn't end up being much of a tax cut for a lot of people. But even they can say they cut taxes, but at the same time they drastically increase spending. So as we've said before, anytime you increase spending or you decrease taxes and increase spending, that's going to increase the federal deficit. It's going to add to the federal debt. So let's continue. As Milton Friedman noted, the true size of the state is measured by how much money it spends. Budget data show that all modern presidents, regardless of party affiliation, have increased the federal fiscal footprint. But Republican administrations have generally increased the amount spent at a faster rate than Democratic ones. Under George W. Bush, who was elected on a platform of fiscal restraint. You see, during the campaigns, they always talk about how, they're going to cut the federal budget. They're going to be budget cutters, They're going to be fiscally conservative. Guess what? That's all BS. Continuing, George W. Bush, who was elected on a platform of fiscal restraint, total federal spending increased in real terms by 53%. Enabled and encouraged by a Republican-led Congress, his administration adopted the politically self-serving notions that, you remember this? Deficits don't matter. Isn't that nice? Deficits don't matter. Let's just spend however much we want to spend. And what kind of programs did they pass? The No Child Left Behind education program, big budget buster. Medicare Part D, that's something FDR would have been very proud of. FDR Jr., Bush, and the bank bailouts, of course, which was writing them a big check with our tax dollars. After they did all the gambling at the casino, we got to pay the tab when they lost. Thank you, Republicans. That's why I left your party and I'm done with you big fat liars. And that's the show for today. You guys, I appreciate you tuning in. Hey, if you like the show, tell a friend. You can find me at my blog is libertymanvan.com, and there you can find links to my videos. Or you can go straight to my YouTube channel. And my YouTube channel is Liberty Man Van, that's 3 words. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Liberty Man Van, and make a donation. Hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to join us next time on Liberty Watch, where we don't believe you need some guy with a bullhorn to tell you what to do.